What is self-serving and serving the piece? This is something that I reflect upon quite often, because who determines the difference and the threshold? What are the criterias? Obviously not objective, because everybody has their own sense of taste or involvement in the performance, or uninvolvement from the piece, as if the piece is a structure and we are just looking at it, but we're not immersing ourselves in it. Almost as if we want to avoid to be too close to the soulful meaning of it, and therefore not perhaps belittle it by our own psyche versus the great statement of the composer, which for some of us represents something unattainable. And perhaps then it should remain read, innerly heard. As soon as you put it in sounds, you start arguing, the tempo, the phrasing, the note, or the delay, or the natural flow. And it's an andante, it's not an adagio, and the articulation and the pedaling. But it's a general feel that all of this blend into a personal statement. So to which extent is it too involved to delay? Well, even to delay the note becomes an artifice, because it's already a prettification of the element, a cutification of the expression, and that is the melody on the 10th, and then the bass is in the distance giving the halo of the resonance. And there are arpeggiated chords into patterns of hemiola groupments. And if you delay the high B flat, which is not what we would have expected if it was very banal, is the appoggiatura to the A flat. Therefore, by being itself the appoggiatura and just playing it exactly in time, perhaps that's the distance with the piece itself, and that the affect of the appoggiatura creates its emotion and doesn't need my subjective emotion to slightly delay it, and perhaps make this color effect to play it slightly softer or louder. But in both cases, I wait for the resolution. And then, but not, he goes in the accacciatura under, which gives the illusion of minor, and it's only a semi-step from under, like this was from above, appoggiare, to lean over. So if the affects are the expression, then the very concept of interpretation, where you involve yourself in the statement, the space between the notes, the completion of the hint that you receive from the composer's text when you read it, and your musical intuition completes it by responding to what you receive in a way like an exhale after the inhale is the tension, and the release, you have the impression that you inhale the music and you exhale when you present it to the audience. In a way, it goes through you as a performer. And when it's filtered through you, if you try to keep away from being too involved, then you don't self-serve. But I wonder why we should not self-serve. And who determines how much self-serve is good taste and at which point self-serving becomes bad taste or over appropriation of the universal text? As if the performer is, in a way, by their personality, coloring the statement by their psyche instead of just presenting the statement as factual as possible. And when the facts are so perfectly balanced by the composer's choosing of this or that chosen note or that chosen phrase, for instance, those who know the piece expect to hear the voicing because it's hinted in the notation by the stem up or down, in other words, separate from this. And when it's played in the fast etude, and you hear, well, obviously it's not emotional like when it's slow, but Chopin embeds in both cases something of a other layer that is enriching the global puzzle of elements or layers or the texture blossom. And I find it very disturbing when some people consider as listeners, exercise listeners or colleagues who could say, yes, but this is self-indulging through the beauty of the piece instead of serving the piece and excluding in a way, perhaps to a certain extent, oneself from it. It's a philosophical aspect of, do we present a work of art? Do we become the work of art during the performance? Meaning not that we impersonate it or we recompose it, because obviously we only recite it, but we don't necessarily only spell it. We retell it. And perhaps these nuances of personal involvement in the interpretation or the reading of the notation of the text comes to the point where some have exaggerated and some hold back too much. And perhaps there is a right middle way where you have a good taste involvement through a delayed note, a rubato, a phrasing, or any other aspect of colorization of inner voices. And it is true that perhaps in a more competitive world of classical music, where people compare each other's interpretations in front of a jury of experts, the denomination for the choice has to be with a personal taste, but the objectivity of the performed elements that are heard. And of course, one can play a note embedded in the pattern or bring it brought out from the pattern. And I think we should be tolerant to accept that for some people it's necessary to involve themselves in the performance without to denaturate the performance per se. It's not a betrayal to make an interpretation etymologically and translation. But ultimately, the piece doesn't exist only on paper. It would be sort of surreal to have a concert hall of people reading the score and leaving in silence, having heard it innerly inside themselves according to their own tastes. So you don't need one representative who plays it for us, because then everybody else will disagree. Just like read a novel and you imagine the characters, and then there is a film adaptation and you go, oh, I didn't like the choice of the edits or the story, the way it's adapted for the screenplay compared to what I liked in the book. And in other words, we hierarchize what is meaningful to us in a masterpiece, or how we imagine the characters. And when they become real by being embodied by essence or soulfully represented, they become vectors of their own reading of the storytelling that they carry through their own charisma. That's why I think that in fact we need to accept the involvement of the interpreter in the way they colorize or inhabit soulfully the piece according to their conviction, or to their emotion, or the way they hear it or they feel it. As a teacher, I am a hyphen between the score, therefore the composer, the editor, the publisher, the manuscript, the first editions, all the source materials, and then the live discovery of the piece by the student who plays it for the last few weeks, months, year, compared to the teacher who, according to their age, let's say, lived with this piece for the last 40 or 50 years, ate it, chewed it, dreamt it, slept with an idea of it, and then woke up and thought of it differently, because it's a travel companion of life intellectually, to live with a Barcarolle by Chopin through and see different aspects appear that you didn't expect, just because even if you went thoroughly through it, there are still connections of ideas that are revealed to you by revisiting it. And it's a gift that keeps on giving. And when somebody else reveals to you through their reading or hearing or feeling or not always analytical, but let's say they analyzed it, but ultimately when you play, you don't analyze. When you play, you deliver. You've analyzed during the study, the learning, the discovery. It's almost like an archaeological musical experience where you enter in the thought process of the composer and what if he did. And you can do a creative voicing in the Barcarolle, but it's not indicated. And so why not, if you do it? And it could be then self-serving, because you love it so much that you love it your way. Mademoiselle Boulanger used to tell me, if you like it not the way it's, let's say, on the score, then write your own, but when you play what is written. And so sometimes we're tempted, nevertheless, to voice it in a way that we bring, I think it seems contradictory, but not necessarily so. I think it's a healthy self-search in humility about not appearing to know, no matter how many seasons of life you have lived with the piece, as a teacher, as a performer, as a reviewer, possibly as a recording artist, and then it still evolves with you. And perhaps the uncertainties deepen, while some certainties are crystallized through a technical aspect that you manage to produce. And then there are some sections in some pieces that remain anticlimactic, like the ending of the Seventh Sonata with the major chromatic scales. And then it always feels like it's not purposely, well, obviously, completed, or it is, but it's not meant to finish, thankfully. With what ifs, you can imagine that the piece could have been more banal, perhaps more complex, perhaps the simplicity of it, its beauty. If you have a Satie, gymnopédie with some kind of imaginary added, God forbids, middle voice, then the simplicity of his poetry is disturbed. And besides, it's a work of art, you respect it for what it is. As it is, and you love it or try to be convinced from it, by it, through it, when you play it. And when the texture is more complex, you have to choose which one you bring and how you bring it. And sometimes you have examples when you teach of a section, like, for instance, second theme, third sonata, Prokofiev. In the same hand. This echo of the ECBE. And then ultimately it's blending because it's in the same hand. So will you ever bring it like on the score by doing? It's almost too much. While this, it's more simple, but it's more the same level of projecting. There are many examples where you could voice this, you could bring out this, you could do less of this, or you can colorize this, and either because you think it's a harmonic, textural, regardless of the reasons. And sometimes you don't need reasons. It's difficult to explain all choices we do. Most of them should be intuitive, despite of all the learning and studying and detailed apprehending the stylistic specificities. That's why I find it very difficult to define where is the line that defines the self-serving from the serving the work. Under-involved, over-involved, not involved, holding back from involved, or allowing to be over-involved. It's a bottomless pit of reflections. Which somehow I find are often solved on the spot when somebody performs with the intuition of their musicianship that guides them, the inner ear, their sense, their intuition, more than all these other accumulated knowledges and experience. And it makes its charm or its depth or its expression of inner philosophical search or just the lightness of being. Remains an open question.